Has Oscar Piastri staked his claim to the Formula One world title this season already after 3 victories in a row? Is Miami the last time we'll ever see Jack Doohan in a Formula One car, with rumours he's set to be replaced? And how do you leave tools in a McLaren Formula One car? Welcome to On Track, available on the talkSPORT network, on the talkSPORT podcast network, and on the talkSPORT Driving YouTube channel. We begin, as always, after an F1 weekend with the On Track recap, looking back at the F1 Miami Grand Prix. I'm John Jackson, joined by our F1 expert, former British F3 driver, Piers Pryor. And Piers, I've been saying this all season. Gunter Steiner's been saying this all season. It's Oscar Piastri's year.
It's looking like it's going pretty well for him so far. I think this weekend he was actually slightly lucky, but you make the best or you make your own luck to a certain extent, because he did sort of luck into getting ahead of Lando Norris, but then proved himself much better equipped in the battle with Max Verstappen than Norris did, which is what allowed him effectively to get the buffer that he needed. And he drove, ultimately, an excellent weekend.
So it was a sprint race weekend. Miami is not your favourite American race. We discussed this last week, but from what I saw, I really enjoyed the racing. So we had the sprint race and Lando Norris wins the sprint race. At this point, are you thinking, okay, he's had a bit of time, he's gone away, he's thought about it, Lando Norris is back?
I was genuinely saying to my friends, I was like, I think Lando Norris is going to win this weekend. I think he's come off the back of not his best performances. He's coming into Miami where he won his first Grand Prix, maybe a bit of a mental reset. He knows he's quick around here. He was then quicker in generally than Piastri in the practices or the practice, and then the sprint section of the weekend, of course, started higher up the grid than Piastri did. So I was thinking, no, Norris win, here we go. But then we saw what happened. A classic Norris Verstappen turn, or first few corners, that gave sort of advantage in the McLaren camp to Piastri, and then Piastri made the most of it going forward. So I think Norris will be frustrated, because the narrative of a lot of the media, maybe ourselves, is that now, Piastri again has got one over on him. But I think Norris actually was performing at a slightly higher level this weekend. It was just the way that things fell in terms of the start and then Piastri getting through that sort of contributed to the way it finished.
Yeah, for me, it was really nice to see Lando Norris and Max Verstappen battling it out, seeing some defensive driving, some attacking driving, without any kind of penalties thrown down, without too many words on the team radio that were too frustrated. Obviously, 2 great drivers, also 2 great friends. Let's talk about then Kimi Antonelli, because Kimi Antonelli took pole position, which was, by a tiny little margin over Oscar Piastri. But we're starting to see what Kimi Antonelli can do. When he got to the race, it kind of felt like maybe his inexperience came to bite him slightly, because he lost quite a few places. I think it was maybe 2 or maybe 3 places in the first corner.
Yeah, I think he was almost too eager to try and get to the lead or consolidate his good qualifying position, and ultimately just a little bit of inexperience showing there. He'll get there, but yeah, it's the first time I think we've really seen what Kimi can do. He's been playing second fiddle in the Mercedes camp to George Russell this season so far, but I think that's no bad thing. We've spoken on this podcast in previous episodes about George Russell and how high a level he's performing at. But Antonelli this weekend was the faster of the 2, almost no doubt, in pretty much most sessions. And George even said that. He said, I've been struggling this weekend. And that's on a weekend in a circuit that Antonelli's actually never raced at before as well. So potentially even more impressive. I think George is going to have more to think about going forward, especially with a little bit of a confidence boost in terms of performance from Antonelli this weekend. But yeah, he just looked like in the starts of the races, it was almost a bit frantic, where you see someone like a Piastri or a Verstappen, they're assertive, assured, and they know what they're doing. It almost like Antonelli was just reaching a little bit, desperately trying to make the most of the situation, which actually ended up playing against him a little bit. But yeah, then again, a bit like with Piastri, Russell, of the slower of the 2 in that team, ended up coming out on top. So it's a bit of a strange one in terms of results for those 2 teams.
Yeah, 4th place finish for George Russell in the sprint race. I remember on the commentary, actually, there was a moment, I can't remember if it was in the sprint race or the Grand Prix, where they said that George Russell needs to assert his dominance. I think maybe he overtook Kimi Antonelli, and it was a moment of Him just reminding Kimi that he's been around a lot longer. When you go from being the young driver alongside a multiple world champion like George Russell was with Lewis Hamilton, to being the lead driver with this kind of young kid, teenager who you have to take under your wing, what kind of mental changes do you think George Russell's had to go through? Because it's not just what happens out on track, it's also all the media activity as well. And we saw a lot at Miami. We'll get into that in a little while, because it seems like there was more kind of brand activity than any race before.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mental change, I think, for a driver like George Russell. Well, he's in his, he's about, I think he's about my age. So it must be late 20s, 27, 28, something like that. He's been in Formula One, what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, a good few years now, since 2019, if I remember rightly. Let me just double check that. Yeah, 2017, actually. So he's done a fair few years in Formula One. So the seasons he did with Williams, I think it was 3 seasons, they were kind of his building up to it. And then he's been with Mercedes for a few years now. I don't actually think that he's had to have a massive mental shift, because as much as he was alongside Lewis Hamilton and people outside viewed Hamilton as the team leader, I mean, realistically, ever since they were teammates, Russell was a match for Hamilton. They were both kind of number ones in that team, and more often than not, in the last year or so, actually, Russell was the one who was just doing better. I mean, that was proven by his places in the championship. I think he finished higher in the last 2 years at the very least, maybe even the year before as well, alongside Hamilton. So George was already performing at a team leading level. The only difference is he's not got an experienced teammate alongside him. And often, to be honest, the drivers don't look at it quite the same way as we often look from the outside in the media. That there's no mental, I'm the team leader in this team. Ultimately, every driver goes into every weekend trying to do their absolute best and try and perform at their highest level, and they're trying to beat their teammate primarily, because if they beat their teammate, then they're doing a good job, and then try and perform at their absolute best so that they can then get the best results. So it's not a massive shift. The only shift I think potentially will be that the direction of the car and the development of the car, rather than it being shared 50-50, I imagine for the first part of this year, at the very least, it's been more 75-80% towards George Russell, because Antonelli just doesn't have the Formula One experience to know what he wants to change, what he wants out of the car, how he can make the car work better for him and both drivers as well. So that's where George potentially is got a bit more on his shoulders in terms of the development. But the actual performance on circuit, clearly Antonelli is a near enough a match in terms of pace. It's just the team leader in terms of development that is the thing he'll be thinking about more.
He does handle things incredibly well, Kimi Antonelli. I remember at the F1 launch back at the O2, not too many months ago now, he made sure he went round and met the Italian journalists first of all, but he went round the media room before even the press conference and was just talking to people and just shaking people's hands. I don't know whether that was some very good advice or whether he came up with that idea of, just endearing himself with the media before the season's even begun. I thought that was very good. And also this past weekend, there was a screening of the documentary about his start at Mercedes, which he turned up too late, I think, because they have so many things they have to do. And things like that, that's a pretty big deal as a teenager, having a documentary made about you. And I'm sure it's the first of many programs or books or films, maybe, depending on how well his career goes, that will be made about him. And he just seemed to handle it incredibly well from what people who were there that I know have said. So, huge weight on his shoulders, but he doesn't seem to be feeling it at all. It kind of takes us on to, did you see the kind of new overalls that Mercedes were wearing? And what do you think of their summer range? It had a kind of bit of maroon on it, which I wasn't too sure about.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about the colour palette. It's not to my personal taste, but I did like the fact that it was a bit different. It's often been with Mercedes like black or grey or white, hasn't it, in the years gone by? So to see a bit of colour creeping in is nice. And it seemed like a lot of the teams were doing that in Miami. The Racing Bulls had a bright pink car, didn't they? And there was some different bits and pieces on quite a few of the other liveries and driver overalls, which is cool to see. I like a bit of variation. A lot of people think it's a bit, I don't know, that's not for them, but I quite like having different takes on the same theme throughout the year. So no, it was cool.
It's when they do it too often, I think. If they're doing it for every single race, I understand that, certain cars manufacturers will do it for their home race or for their maybe main sponsor's home race. That's often got a big bearing as well. But if they keep doing it, it hasn't got quite so much impact. The Racing
Yes.
Bulls was really good. The pink of that, I really love the pink t-shirt. I've actually asked for one. See if someone could buy me one while they're out there. I'm assuming they're selling them. But I think Stake had a special car as well. But I think everyone was talking about one special item that was in the paddock. And I know that it wasn't FIA approved. I think you might have spoken with Hawksby and Jacobs about this. And that is Lando Norris's glitter ball, disco ball helmet. What did you make of that? Obviously, when it was in the car, it was kind of a vinyl version. So it wasn't, mirrored glass and light blinding every other driver out there, but it looked pretty cool. It's quite a bold one from him. I know he's had a basketball before.
Yeah, I really enjoy those funky helmets, and it's cool that Lando does that. Some of the drivers don't stray too much from their design. They just have sort of inflections, like Piastri's, I mean, to my eye, looked very similar. I'm sure it probably had little details on it, but to go with full glitter ball, and then also we had the orange helmet from as in like the fruit orange helmet from Albon as well, which was quite entertaining. No, I like that sort of thing. It adds something else to look at, and as long as you can tell the drivers apart, and it's something that isn't, horrific, then I'm all for it. And it's quite good to see the drivers expressing themselves through the designs of their helmet as well.
I remember Oscar Piastri actually in Australia was saying, I've got my special Australian helmet. And then he went on to say it's exactly the same design as my normal helmet. It's just got a couple of different colours on it. So it wasn't really that adventurous. And that's exactly what you mean. Whereas Lando and Alex Albon, as you say, have completely gone off. And I like that. That's really cool. I think Lewis Hamilton had a special one as well. And I couldn't tell the difference. I wasn't spending much time putting them side by side, but it was just a yellow helmet. It looked pretty cool. What do you make of how much, how much kind of brand activity there has been around the Miami Grand Prix? It feels like, every time I opened Instagram, there was something else going on. We had, the big launch of Cadillac, which was maybe a little bit underwhelming. It was just a logo really in a video. I think some people were expecting maybe a big driver announcement. There was talks of Sergio Perez, which obviously still could happen. Rumours that he's been talking to a few teams. And then, of course, Racing Bulls had their car on some kind of like plinth on the beach, which was unveiled. And it feels like, in terms of sort of social media influencers, every influencer in the world of motorsport I know was there doing something. Do you think it kind of distracts from the actual race?
I don't think it distracts from the race. I mean, maybe I'm not the best person to talk. I'm by no stretch a social media expert. I am not an influencer. I'm not in brand management and all that. But I forgive me for this. I don't know why Miami gets so much attention. Like, I know it's a new Grand Prix in the last few years, but I can kind of almost get when they go to somewhere like Japan and it's cherry blossom season and it's a completely different culture, that that you have some new things going on. But Miami it's just another American Grand Prix. And I mean this with full respect to Miami. I've never been. Who knows, if I went, I might have a completely different opinion. But it doesn't scream to me like it's somewhere groundbreaking in terms of it's a new continent or something or anything like that. Yeah, it's a cool place. It's got a certain vibe. So that's what a lot of the teams are, running with, and a lot of the brand stunts that they're pulling are going with. So, I suppose to a certain extent, any publicity is good publicity, and if you've got an excuse to do something, then why not? But yeah, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. But hey, we got some cool stuff out of it. I really did enjoy the livery of Racing Bulls. We've spoken about it, and actually their launch was pretty cool. Like having it on the water with the city in the background, I quite enjoyed that. And the helmets, that sort of thing, I'm all for. So hey, it's not a bad thing, but I just doesn't there must be a reason, but I'm maybe not in the know enough to understand why.
Hey, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. On the subject of Cadillac then, what do you make of the whole announcement they went with? It wasn't really an announcement at all, but it's getting exciting. There's going to be more news month by month, I'm sure.
Absolutely. I think you're right. Potentially a little bit underwhelming, but I think they felt like because it was their first opportunity in 2025 in their home, in America, they had to do something, and they've got something to show. So they showed it, and also it's just keeping them relevant. I think they want Cadillac as a brand. They want people to know that they're coming into the Formula One space, and that they don't want people to forget, and they're just trying to stake their claim and let people know about them. So it makes sense. We will see more as the year goes on. I imagine probably more stuff at the other two US-based Grand Prix throughout the year, among other bits and pieces. It sounds like they're full steam ahead, hearing from a lot from their new team principal over this weekend. He was on a lot of the broadcasts. I'm most excited just to have another team on the grid. It's more cars, more racing, more action, more stories. I think it's only a good thing from my point of view. I know there's been obviously a lot of debate over the last 18 months about whether they should be allowed in. The one point they weren't, then they were, and all that. But the fact that it looks like it's all going ahead is great.
Early prediction, and I feel like they will want to announce drivers at, let's say, Austin, the US Grand Prix later in the year. It seems like a good time if it doesn't leak already. Early prediction of who they might get to drive for them. The lure of maybe having, Zhou Guan Yu with a load of money behind him, and of course Checo Perez with a load of money behind him. These new companies, these new projects, I know they're not a new company, but the new escapade needs a bit of cash. They both bring a load of money.
I would like to see them choose one good driver who has cash, so like a likes of a Perez or a Guan Yu Zhou, and then one driver that they're choosing purely on performance. So either an up-and-coming driver that hasn't had an opportunity with another team, or an established driver who knows they can perform. Let's say, someone like Valtteri Bottas. I wouldn't be against Bottas coming along, and I think potentially they will have a fairly experienced lineup for the first year or two, because they don't have any of that back catalogue of experience. They don't have the data from years gone by. They don't have all of the information that all of the other teams have had from racing for the last however many years. So therefore, they're going to be leaning on experience a lot more, and that will be a lot more valuable to them. I don't expect them to be challenging for the World Championship in either the drivers or constructors. I don't expect them to be challenging for wins, at least in the first half year, potentially the whole year. They're probably going to be towards the back of the grid just because of those reasons I've stated. They just don't have the experience and the knowledge that other teams are getting, week on week through all the races. Granted, different cars in 2026 and new regulations, so there's a bit of an opportunity there, but they're just not a well-oiled racing machine, because how can you be if you haven't done it in your entity? Of course, there's a lot of experience in the team. I think it's Graham Loudon, isn't he? He's the team principal, and he's got a lot of experience. There's a lot of good personnel going into that team. They've got the potential and the people to succeed, but it's going to take a bit of momentum building, in my opinion. It would be a great story for them to jump in and do well, but I can't see them, I can't see them being the pace setters from the word go.
Well, of course, and this adds to your point, maybe they do go with two experienced drivers that happen to bring cash, because they can give input into what the team needs to do. They can help develop the car. They can get that data up. They can get them a bit more competitive. And then maybe there's a young American star that they can bring in down the line. And maybe they just have an American driver as a third driver in a similar role to what Valtteri Bottas is doing at the moment at Mercedes. So I guess with Cadillac, we will watch this space. Let's talk about Max Verstappen, and not just that Max Verstappen managed to put that Red Bull on pole position for the Grand Prix, but first of all, with everything that was going on in Max Verstappen's life this past weekend, I think it makes it even more impressive. I landed in Nice on, I think it was Wednesday afternoon, and we were taxiing around, and I was on the plane there. We were going there for Formula E in Monaco, and I was with some of the other journalists, and one of the journalists that was sat in front of me by the window, very eagle-eyed, spotted that Max Verstappen's plane was still parked at Nice airport. And then a little bit of Googling in the taxi, looking on flight radar, he realised that that is Max's plane. Max always flies in his plane. Why is he still there on Wednesday when he's got media day the next day and he should be in Miami? Little bit of digging worked out. It was likely that he'd had a child and that his daughter had been born. He was absolutely obsessed with this story, was about to run it, and then unfortunately someone else ran it. I think Formula One or maybe Max or someone ran, I think maybe Red Bull actually posted a message about Max missing media day because of a family situation or however they worded it, and he was gutted that he didn't get the scoop on that. So for him, he should probably learn to just put stuff out straight away and say sorry later. But for Max to have a baby with his wife and then get his head in the game to get on that long flight. It's not like it's just a European flight or anything like that. To fly over there, miss media day, and just not have missed a step at all. That takes a lot, given that, there'll have been a lack of sleep. It's just a huge emotional moment in your life. And they do sort of say that once drivers have kids, they get a bit slower. And I know he joked about that, but it doesn't look like Max Verstappen's getting any slower.
No, it doesn't. Maybe this is proof that he is a robot after all. But then again, if he was a robot, he wouldn't be able to have a kid. So maybe not. But
and it wouldn't show emotion either as a robot.
Well, that's exactly what I was talking about. But yeah, he's just on another level. He's just so good. He's just so professional. He just gets on. It's just job at hand, isn't it? As soon as he's at the track, he just performs, and he just doesn't have a day off ever. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. But the one thing this weekend is that that's the first mistake I've seen Max Verstappen make, I think, and I can't remember how long, was when he locked up and let Piastri shoot. Piastri got through. But that's the level that we're at, like, that he's driving at. That is, I'm looking at it going, that's the first mistake I've seen him made in a long time. It's just a tiny little lockup in effectively a defensive masterclass other than that. So, performing at a massive level, and to do that with all that's going on, his mind clearly, when he's out of the car, is probably not completely on just his job, but when he's in the car, he's still just absolutely smashing it. And there's that Red Bull had no business being on pole position, really, did it? Let's be honest. And it's the same story in Japan as well. He's just a different level, I think, at the moment. And the only person I think is anywhere near him at the moment is Russell. But in terms of that level, because I've discussed it before, I'm going to say it again. He's just, even when the things aren't going well for Russell, he performs. Same with Verstappen. Even when he's got distractions, he performs.
Well, obviously he did put it on pole position, but I know that you think that was maybe down to a more of a mistake from Lando Norris than anything.
Yes, I don't. Norris has this knack of being able to snatch defeat away from the jaws of victory into making little mistakes when it matters most. And I think some of it is just chance. Some of the situations where people have said, "Oh, he's bottled it," or this and that. It's just one of those things that's just gone against him. But this occasion, in qualifying Q3, he was on course to be on pole position, and then made a quite silly error at the last corner. He turned in early and hit the curb, and that hurt his exit, and that effectively gave pole position to Max Verstappen by, what was it, 600ths of a second. You can't afford to be making little errors like that when the pole margin at all of the races this season has been under 1/10 of a second. And 1/10 of a second, you can lose 1/10 of a second by having a small wheel spin moment, by hitting a curb, for example. But turning in early and hitting a curb, that's quite a sloppy mistake for a Formula One driver. You very, very rarely see that, which says to me that potentially Lando is feeling the pressure a little bit. It's something that I wouldn't expect to see from the likes of Verstappen, or even maybe Piastri or Russell or Leclerc or Hamilton. Those drivers that we know that can perform under pressure, they don't make mistakes like that. That doesn't happen. And it's just a bit sloppy from Norris. And ultimately it cost him, because I think if Norris had got on pole position, he probably would have led out of turn one, and then it probably would have been his race, because he was, in my opinion, the fastest car. And that's the margins. It's a small error in qualifying, but then it sort of propagates through the rest of the weekend, and ultimately led him to not finish ahead of Piastri.
It's not to bash Lando Norris. It feels like a lot of people assume that if you criticize someone or even point out a mistake, you're bashing someone. But when you look at Oscar Piastri, he's made one mistake this year, and that was in Australia in terrible conditions. And since then, he's been pretty perfect. So the fine margins are what you talk about. And you've obviously been in the cockpit of the car. You know what those fine margins are and how something tiny can make a huge difference. Like having maybe some tools in your car, which maybe weigh the car down. That's pretty ridiculous, right?
That was a weird one, wasn't it, from practice, when there was not one but two torches in the cockpit of Lando's car, and there's not a lot of space in those. People who have not actually sat in a single seater, especially a Formula One car, you're literally cocooned in there. There's no extra space. So as soon as he moved, he would have felt those rattling around. But yeah, that was a weird one, quite entertaining to see. And also the way that Norris said over the radio, he was just like, "Oh, there's all sorts of tools in here, guys. What are you doing?" It was so entertaining.
That is really sloppy. That's kind of next level to leaving like the jack. Back in the day, they'd kind of leave the jack attached to the car, or there'd be a gun left on there on the wheel nut, and the car couldn't move forward. That's a new one on me. Someone leaving things inside, because surely if you are a pit engineer, you'll go, okay, that was good. Yeah, fix that. Hang on, where's my toolkit? Oh, wait, it's still in the car. It's a remarkable thing to think about. And also, actually, you talk about getting into a Formula One car. I know a lot of people won't have got into one, but I know when you go to fan areas, you can sit in a replica of a cockpit or whatever. I remember doing that at the Berlin E-Prix when I first went and watched my first ever Formula E race, and they had like half a Porsche car. If you're going to do it, make sure you stretch first, because I got cramp as I got into that car. And it was one of those ones where once you're in, they take a photo of you, and they took the photo, and I'm getting out of the car and I look incredibly pained. It looks like I really don't want to be there. But actually, I was just trying to, save my thigh or calf or whatever it is from hideous cramp, which, yeah, just stretch. before you get in. There'll be plenty of time. There's normally a line for it. So yeah, make sure you get that sorted. Let's get back to the race then. Obviously, that move from Oscar Piastri, he kind of bided his time and waited for Max to make a mistake. Max locked up. Oscar kind of felt like he held back slightly, and then he could just cut inside of Max Verstappen. Oscar does show that kind of predatory instinct, doesn't he? He can wait for another driver to make a mistake. He's not going to go into things too aggressively and make moves that maybe aren't going to work out for him, like maybe a Kimi Antonelli or another young rookie could do at the moment.
Yeah, I think Piastri really showed his very cunning and clever racecraft this weekend, and you mentioned this as almost a killer instinct. He didn't get sucked into Max Verstappen's games. A lot of drivers let's contrast Piastri attacking Verstappen to Norris attacking Verstappen at the same corners during the race. Piastri got there first, so granted, he might have had a slightly easier time, but Piastri didn't try and go around the outside of Max because he knows that his history says you try and go around the outside of Max, he's going to force you off the circuit and you're going to have no way through. And that's what Max does. He puts you to the outside by defending the inside and then gives you no route through, which means that ultimately, you lose a bit of time and then you have to have a couple of laps to catch up. And by that time, your tyre advantage is gone and so on and so on. And it works well for Max. Again, granted, sometimes I think he goes over the line, but it's the way it works for him. He knew this. So therefore, he dummied Max to say, look, I'm going around the outside, but what carried enough speed in that he suckered Max into that very, very small error, but an error nonetheless, and got through with a cutback. And it was just clinical. It was just such a good overtake in terms of the way it was crafted. It wasn't, grandstand raising, amazing, dive bomb, but it was very clever and he got the move done efficiently. And then a few laps later, Norris got onto the back of Verstappen, tries to go around the outside. What happened? Norris got forced off and it took him quite a while to get through. And ultimately it took a DRS pass, I think, in the end for him to get through. And again, these are the fine margins that the drivers have to be working with. Piastri got to the back of Verstappen, pulled the clinical move, forced Max into a mistake. So clearly Max was feeling a little bit of pressure because Max doesn't make very many mistakes, and then got away. And then that allowed Piastri to get a 9-second gap by the time that Norris got through. And if that gap wasn't at 9 seconds, we could have seen a battle for the McLarens at the end because we've mentioned it before. I think Norris was quicker this weekend.
Just looking at the stats here, and actually George Russell, who finished third, who again, very consistent, you've been saying this all season, he was 37.644 seconds back from Oscar Piastri at the end of the race. So a very dominant race in the end by McLaren, despite them fighting it out a little bit along the way. And it just shows that they are the team to beat at the moment. Their second Miami Grand Prix race win in a year after obviously Lando's first race win last year. Let's take a look then at some of the other drivers this past weekend. Let's start, for example, with Liam Lawson, Piers, because it was another frustrating weekend for Liam Lawson. We saw him, enjoying Isaac Hadjar's company, doing their launch of their bright pink car, and they do these TikToks with sort of big movie moments, which are quite funny. However, on the track, he made a mistake, which caused an accident. And was it his fault, or was it a racing incident with Jack Doohan?
It wasn't a good weekend for Liam Lawson. As you know, normally I'm one to defend Liam. I think he's the level he can perform at, from what I've seen in his years up to Formula One, is very, very high. And I think he, given the right circumstance and situation and mind frame, he could be right up there. But this weekend wasn't good. And that incident, zone one, the incident with Fernando Alonso, he got a penalty for, and then the incident at turn one in the actual race, I think that's on Liam, if I'm honest. Normally it's the driver on the inside that you point the blame at, but Liam had space on his left and he knew that Jack was on his right. I don't know why he turned in and made the apex. And unfortunately, it didn't exactly end well for either of them. And both of those drivers are under pressure and needed a clean race.
With the likes of Arvid Lindblad coming up through the Red Bull ranks and talks of him maybe, I would say probably being on the F1 grid like next year because he is viewed as being that good, you would maybe say, okay, well, he'll likely go into the Racing Bulls team. Yuki Tsunoda finished 10th. Looks like that extra work at Silverstone a couple of weeks ago has paid off. He looks to be getting to grips with a car that maybe a lot of drivers don't get to grips with. Let's say Yuki Tsunoda is staying at Red Bull for the long term, maybe, or maybe he's going somewhere else with Honda moving away. Arvid Lindblad would be a good shout to move up. He's shown some good performances in F2. Isaac Hadjar's been outperforming Liam Lawson quite comfortably already. So Liam Lawson's the person to potentially make way. Do you think that maybe Liam Lawson is at risk of having this season and then maybe his F1 career's up in the air again? Maybe he never races in F1 again?
I hate to say it, but I can't disagree with anything you've said there. ultimately in Formula One, you've got to perform. As much as I think Liam has the minerals to perform, it's just not working out for him at the moment. And if he doesn't turn it around, he's going to be under pressure. And if you look at the roster of drivers, you're not getting Max Verstappen. Tsunoda, we don't know, but for now, let's assume he's staying there. And then of the two drivers at VCARB, you're going to remove the one that's not doing the best. And unfortunately, at the moment, Hadjar is outperforming Liam pretty consistently, both in terms of outright pace and then overall race performance as well. So it's not looking good for Liam. Impressive from Hadjar. I mean, he nearly got that point over Tsunoda. I think it was only a 1/10 of a second. But that again, you're comparing a VCARB and a Red Bull. So Hadjar doing a great job.
It really is. For me, Liam Lawson's career, or maybe future, I'm feeling a Marcus Ericsson vibe. I'm feeling like he could go somewhere else and show the potential that he maybe hasn't shown in Formula One. Marcus Ericsson done pretty well in IndyCar. I don't know. I'm just feeling that, but that's just me plucking something out of the backs of the distance of my mind. Obviously, that incident was with Jack Doohan, and the big rumours are, and when the rumours are being reported by the big boys in the world of motorsports media, it normally means they know something, they're just not allowed to fully explain it. It sounds like Jack Doohan may have done his last race for Alpine, and therefore maybe his career in Formula One is even shorter than Nick de Vries.
Yeah, I was mad. I feel sorry for Doohan because there was talk before he'd done a race that he wasn't going to last. Unfortunately, things haven't gone his way and he's not had the best results. Therefore, we're in this position. But this weekend, you could feel, you felt like there was extra pressure this weekend. He was more tetchy than normal. I mean, you heard the outbursts over the radio and then also his post qualifying interview where he was blocked out of the pit lane and he was quite scathing in terms of the way he was talking about the team. But you could sense there was a person who needed a result this weekend. I don't know whether anything had been said or whether he can just feel that the tides are going against him. But what with his not great showing qualifying, again, granted, not entirely his fault, but ultimately it happened. And then with a poor result in the race, it's not exactly helping his situation. And I hope we see more of Doohan because I'm very much on the side that you need to give drivers at least half a season. If you're going to put someone in a Formula One car, give them a chance to figure out the bits that go wrong, make a few little errors here and there because Formula One is such a level above every other series. And if you don't give drivers long enough, then you're not giving them a chance to show their potential. But at the same time, when you've got people breathing down your neck and cutthroat people in charge like Flavio Briatore, then if you're not performing, then you're going to be under pressure. And who knows what will happen in the next race? But we've got a couple of weeks now before Imola. A lot can happen.
And of course, sponsors, which come into this massively. And we know that Franco Colapinto has got some big sponsors from South America backing him. I'm just looking at Jack Doohan's results, actually. Retired in Australia, 13th in China, 15th in Japan, 14th in Bahrain, 17th in Saudi. And then obviously this retirement again in Miami. Compare that to Pierre Gasly. And I know you always get compared to your teammate. 11th in Australia, disqualified in China, 13th Japan, Bahrain, he finished 7th, his best result this year, retired last time out in Saudi Arabia, and then 13th in Miami. It's not like Pierre Gasly's doing amazing things in that car, is it?
Well, actually, to a certain extent, I disagree. Those results don't display how good Gasly's been this year. Gasly's looked like he's been a genuine points contender at every race this year. Can we say the same about Doohan? Yes, of course, there's a couple of retirements in there, but let's look at Saudi Arabia last time out, DNF, but he was fighting alongside a Red Bull on lap 1 racing incident. He was in the chance for points. Australia, he was not amazing but not bad. China, I think was he in a points position when he got disqualified? I think he was close to.
Up there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like in every race, he's looked like he could have been scoring points. At no point has anyone looked at as Jack Doohan looked like he's been able to score decent points. Maybe like there was a chance at a 10th place here and there, but you're looking at performance, not just results. Of course, results are needed in Formula One because results are where the points are, and the points is what they need. But ultimately, if you're performing at a high level, the results will then come. But clearly, Doohan hasn't been performing at the level that Alpine are happy with. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Yeah, sadly not. We need to talk then a little about Lewis Hamilton to end things off, because we were very keen to see the Ferrari Special Edition Miami overalls. We thought we might finally get the kind of complete car to match, but no, it was just the front wing, and a lot of people were very disappointed. But I mean, that kind of luckily overshadowed maybe another disappointing weekend for Lewis. Third place in the sprint race, so he's showing he's good in the sprint races, but finishing down in 8th in the Grand Prix. Is that maybe where the Ferrari is, or do you think he could maybe got more out of that car?
I mean, judging by the fact that Leclerc was right ahead of him and they were basically inseparable on track, I think that's where the Ferrari was this weekend. I think it was a bad weekend for Ferrari. Clearly, they hadn't got something right this weekend, and the circuit didn't suit the Ferrari because they've been better than this previously. And arguably, the Williams was a better car this weekend than the Ferrari. So the fourth best car was the Williams, not the Ferrari, which is crazy to say considering where they've been. But Hamilton, we heard him over the team radio. He's getting a bit disgruntled with the lack of assertiveness in terms of strategy, and was pretty sarcastic over the radio, which made for some entertaining moments during the second half of the race. But again, Hamilton's just not quite gelled yet with Ferrari in terms of both the operation and the car. Although he has, I think, been a bit close to Leclerc this weekend in overall performance. You mentioned it already. Good result in the sprint. That means that this year in sprints he's had a first and a third, which doesn't sound too bad. But then you look at the race results and it's a bit different. Hamilton just needs, I think, one solid weekend where he gets to grips with the car, gets to grips with the team. And then, he could have a really good second half of the year, because the Ferrari has shown streaks of being, really good. And the field is so close that if they get a few things right, they could be right in the hunt. And I'm looking forward to seeing if that happens at somewhere like Imola in Italy, the homeland of Ferrari, next time out.
Yeah, it's a big race. Do you think that Carlos Sainz is licking his lips, given that he had to leave Ferrari to make way for Lewis Hamilton? We all know this. And great weekend for Williams with Albon finishing 5th and Sainz finishing 9th. Only 4 tenths behind Lewis Hamilton. I think the time that Carlos Sainz comes ahead of Lewis Hamilton, it's going to be a big moment, I'm guessing.
I think it's one for the media. I don't think Sainz actually has any bad blood. I think, it would be a great story. So let's see what happens. But I think, ultimately the Williams have definitely taken a step forward this year, clearly. And the Ferrari is not quite potentially performing at the level we're used to it. But then who knows? Don't forget, there's all this. We've got 2026 in the mix, because all these teams are having to divert resource to 2026. And we don't know how much resource and how much effort each of the teams is putting on next year, because when you put people and time and money towards 26, you're taking it away from the current season. So if we're seeing dips in performance, we don't know whether that's because it's they're just not performing at the level they want to, or whether it's almost a deliberate dip in performance to have a rebound next year, like I think Aston Martin are doing. Aston Martin are having an absolutely terrible time at the moment, but I think that's because their eggs are firmly in the 2026 basket.
It would help if Fernando Alonso kept the car out of the wall. Was that a mistake that he made on his own? I think he definitely made one mistake on his own, and then he completely totaled the car at one point, didn't he?
But it was on the sprint, wasn't it? With Lawson on Saturday was when he hit the wall. Gave the Aston engineers a lot to do, and then Sunday, weird spin from Fernando Alonso into that middle sector after the long straight. It was clumsy, just kind of really slow speed, rear came around, which says to me that car is clearly not easy to drive, because a driver of Alonso's skill and experience doesn't make mistakes like that very often. So clearly all is not well with the current 2025 Aston Martin car.
We shall see. Lots to look forward to at Imola in 2 weeks' time. And we will talk more about that then, Piers. Thank you very much for joining me.